I'd now like to introduce you to today's presenter, Matt Donovan. Matt is the Vice President of Digital Learning Strategies and Solutions, and he brings more than 25 years of experience crafting training and development solutions with a focus on performance-driven learning. He's led the production of more than 300 custom online courses for Fortune 500 companies, many of which employ a scenario-based approach focusing on reinforcing authentic work practice. Matt received an MS in Instructional Systems Technology from Indiana University, and his work has been published in several learning industry publications. I've worked with Matt for a number of years, and I can say that you are all in very good hands today. So Matt, I will go ahead and turn the session over to you.
Thanks, Kayla. Good to be with you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you're at. So we're going to be talking today about how to avoid that shiny object syndrome. And so I want to talk a little bit, where is that emanating from, where is it coming from, and then a process on how you can start to sort through that to avoid picking up a shiny object and not getting the return on the investment that you're hoping for. So if you've attended one of my sessions before, you know I talk a lot about the digital disruptions and what's really affecting that. And I think one of the things that really compounding the shiny object syndrome is that right now we have a lot of disruption in the learning space. There's a lot of new technologies, new emerging practices, new emerging roles that are actually in the landscape. Many of them are actually quite beneficial. Many of them do have value out there. The real question is, are they going to have value for you? So when you think about the amount of that disruption as we move towards the digital space, the question is what is the right tools, techniques, and approach that we need to have that are going to help us make that journey or that transformation to a digital organization, meeting the needs of the digital learner, or being able to support through the right digital operations. And so we have an approach or a technique that's really going to help us take a closer look at that. So when you look at some of the trends, and I just pulled together a few trends that we're seeing in the industry. Many of you could probably point to examples in or around you. A couple of things we're seeing, for example, the appification of learning platforms. Again, around that digital disruption, we're seeing new range of tools that are providing a whole set of niche features. So instead of saying like one single enterprise application like an LMS, being able to provide the entire range of services or features that's going to meet the needs of the learners. We're not seeing that. We're seeing a combination. So, for example, I may have a video-based coaching platform in combination with a MOOC platform with a chat bot to support. So you may actually have or pull together several of these small ones to meet a full suite of services. Doesn't necessarily mean that the LMS is completely going away for a lot of organizations. They still do need to track certain elements of training, but with the increase in the need for the informal, the expanded experience, we're seeing new tools that are coming to the table. So one of the elements around the shiny object syndrome is, hey, there's a lot of offerings out there. Ooh, let's try this one, or maybe we'll try that one. And our approach is to say, you know, you want to have a process that allows you through progressive validation, through progressive verification that it's actually the right tool, it's going to be the right tool to drive the outcomes, and it's going to give you the return that you're looking for before you would launch it full scale in an organization. Another one is the Uberization of content and services, for example. So we're seeing places where we're having a lot more smaller vendors being able to also participate and provide niche services within a bigger space as well. So, for example, is it the right thing for you to kind of participate in a gig-based economy where you may go out there and have a preset, small, discrete vendors that meet very small niches as you go? Is that the right type of business model or approach for you? Is that the right, going to give you the return on investment for your partners, your business partners? Microdization of assets, everybody's seen that. I think that if you've been around for at least the past 3 years, we've been talking about making our learning nuggets smaller, our learning events more discrete, more shareable, that create a better experience. So we're seeing a lot of new approaches within that, but the question is, what's the right level of microdization? What's this? How do you reconstruct them to serve a full curriculum? So as an approach or methodology, we're seeing that definitely come in line. And there are so many different approaches you can take to that. Some will actually yield better results for your specific needs than others. And the last one is looking really at pervasive learning systems, where we're seeing that to create that full digital learning experience, there are larger ones that are actually, so I would think of like a big, large curated platform. For example, one that is actually wraps around both the formal and the informal space to be able to provide a full environment where the learners are working. Is that the right platform for you? Is it the right specific platform for you as you would move forward? How would you use it in your organization? What's the right level of curation that's going to be put on that platform? So these are just trends that are driving critical questions that really elicit that shiny object syndrome. And so we want to talk about how do you avoid that? How do you reduce the risk that you have in selecting something that's not going to work for you? And so that's really where we want to dig into having a process or an approach and a dedicated space where you can explore, you can innovate, you can refine your understanding of what these tools are. You can do it in a small, safe space. The key here is that you want to take it away from your day-to-day execution activities as you learn about how effective they may be on larger scale. So rather than trying a shiny object out on a mission-critical initiative, when you're trying to do a high-profile global rollout, it's not the time to generally try something you've never tried before. The idea is to take a proactive approach where before that initiative came up and said we want to try a new collaborative technique or a new collaborative platform, through your Innovation Center you would have been able to move it through progressive viability using evidence-based testing to say we not only are comfortable that it will achieve the right instructional outcomes, the right performance outcomes, here's how we should design it, but we also will know it'll work in our software environment, our technical or security environment, long before we actually put it at the tail end of an experience. So when I look at it, these are some of the key things that we look at for what an Innovation Center will do for you. I think when we look at the innovative behaviors, these are the things that you need to cultivate. And when you talk about observing, questioning, networking, experimenting, and associating, these are the backbones of how you take the information, gather data on it, and then share it amongst others so that they can benefit from it. To, again, instead of just picking something that says it sounds new and it sounds cool, you can actually go back and say, what is the general data or the research on this? What's the research within our organization? What are we finding? And then you can sort through the shiny objects to get to the ones that actually work for you. And so underlying that, we want to make sure that we are still experimenting. I mean, we're still exploring new tools that are coming in. It's not like you ignore them and avoid them. You have to become more intimate with them, understand how they're going to work, how they're going to work within your populations. And that's the key part around questioning. Not only, how does it function? Will it be secure? But how would we use it? Where is it a good application? Where is it not a good application? And you're trying to hypothesize and test those hypotheses before you're out there running a mission-critical initiative. And we really haven't tried it, but we need to do something new and wow a stakeholder or something. This allows you to actually still bring a new product, an innovative approach, but it's going to be tested through proactive use of an Innovation Center. And then the experimenting, as I talked about, that's how you're gathering your key data. So you actually want to try it in small test populations. You can try it on, what I would say simulated learning experiences. You can try the methodology and apply it to a simulated learning experience so you can actually see how it may function. If it has collaborative and social elements, you can kind of construct a very simple exercise, bring participants into it, set a time window, collect data. I mean, one of the beautiful things that we're seeing nowadays is that a lot of platforms, when it's a platform conversation, they actually have a lot of great data underlying them. So you get a chance to see, how are people connecting and collaborating and sharing? What's the data you're seeing with how people are being able to respond to it, which gives you deeper insights more than just, do I like it, do I not like it? And then the last one is probably the most important, is around associating and making sure that as you wrap up your conclusions or you figured out what works and what may work but we haven't really seen it as a good application for us, or this just doesn't really work, we're not going to invest in this, being able to communicate that across the organization is the next most critical step. Because in order for decision makers to not make that to avoid that shiny object syndrome, you want to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of what did we see work, what we were trying to do, how to be able to do it. So you have push communication to talk about, here's what we're currently running experiments with, here's what we're seeing, here's the platforms. So you're communicating for awareness standpoint. And then you also need to kind of create a center space where you actually people can kind of pull and retrieve data. So if they want to come in and be able to search and find, what do we know about gamification platforms? And then when you pull up information around gamification platforms, you can actually see, here's 3 we've experimented with. We've seen a demo on this one, but we've actually tried these 2, and these 2 we've actually implemented and got good success with it. So when folks are getting information, they're not just getting the same old information of like, what is it? Can you show me a picture of it? But they're actually able to pull out of that centralized, storage, that information base. They're actually able to see progressively, how viable was the concept. And you may have something, hey, we're just starting to play with this, and if somebody wanted to adopt and try it, they may be able to then set up a test alert or a pilot within the Innovation Center. But again, this is all about not just letting the organization know what to do, which shiny objects to implement, but some of the most valuable conversations have been around what not to implement. And it's not because it's necessarily bad or wrong as a platform or a philosophy. It just may not be the right application for your organization. So there is a 5-step process I kind of talked about as you go through. So when you would see some of these things that may catch your attention out there. So these shiny objects that are all available out there, you have a plan, you want to go forward and say, how will we start to look at these and engage with them in our process? So there's a first phase, which is discovery. We're going to see what's out there. We're going to the conferences, we're going to look at the expos, we're going to see, we're going to join webinars, we're going to see what's available out there. We're going to try and look at things that are near the learning space. Maybe there's other tools or techniques in other spaces that we may catch our attention. So we want to bring them in, so that's discovery. And then we're going to create a series of questions we're asking about it. What do we know about this? What do we not know? What else do we need to figure out about this? Is it safe? Is it secure? Will it yield, this? Is it driven by collaboration? What are key or critical features that need to be put in place in order for it to succeed? These are all the things that you really want to refine, or the questions that you have about it, and then you use those questions to kind of set up that test. That's where the experimentation really is. Again, is setting up a structured test where you can, again, get good, solid, evidence-based data. Now, these don't have to be, although they can be, larger, more involved experiments. Like a true pilot would actually probably include target audience members with truly relevant content. It may be a small population, but you may run like A/B testing with a control group to see, what's the learning efficacy of this, and then you can also track, how easy was it to implement. But the idea behind that is that you want to be able to experiment and learn around that. Now, a test and learn is a much simpler one. You create a very simple setup or a test or a proof of concept. You're actually in the platform, or you're using the methodology, or have an output. But the idea here is that it's something concrete that people can play with or interact with to start to get the feel for the dynamics of the actual whatever it is you're testing. And then the last one, or the last 2 really are around reflection and sharing. And then as, again, it gets to more progressively viable, you're sharing those. Things that aren't working, you're communicating that. And for those that are really working well, then you move into the phase of integration, which is really one of the most important phases, is really focusing on how do we operationalize this. So this is really going to work. This is not just a shiny object, but it's actually something that's going to yield a return, and you can communicate to the organization what the return on that will be, and here's how you get that return by implementing like this or that. That's when you move into operationalization. So again, really looking at those 5 behaviors and that 5-step innovation process are easy ways to get started. And like I said, they do not have to be huge, time-consuming experiments. You can rapidly pull together a prototype of an experience, put some target users around it, and see what the impact is. The last 1 or 4 types of, another slide we talk about real quick, are types of innovation. I already talked a little bit about it, test and learn and pilot, but we can also do general exploration, which is usually data and research that we pull about it, and a demonstration is usually a demonstration by a practitioner or a demo of the platform. So it's exposure to get to see what it is, but there are 4 types of ways that you can learn more about them, each progressively more involved than the last. Here's an example of an output that we brought through, for example, the concept of augmented reality. We've talked about for our partners and our clients, when is augmented reality valuable? What are the approaches? What are the platforms? How would it be structured? And this is an example of how we went through progressive viability to be able to learn more about, I'd say the nuance of implementing it really well. What are the spaces that it can add value? Where have we seen it be successful in demonstration? So rather than just adopting VR and say, hey, we're going to roll these out, we actually use the opportunities to build it, to test it, to see how the platforms, the technology worked, and say, how do people react or respond to the application of that? So AR is definitely one, and virtual reality is another one. It's something else that's complex that, it's not an everyday use in your organization, but there can be really good places where you use virtual reality. And I think this is one, like augmented reality, that can really suffer from that shiny object syndrome. Sometimes it's really cool technology, and it seems to be very engaging, and there is an importance of being able to capture the imagination, but we also want to move just beyond the wow factor into how would you really use this to drive behavior change, increase retention, et cetera, and that's really, again, using that process to kind of move us through that. So again, how do we get started? Engaging a cross-functional team, ensure the resources are available. You want to create a space for them to work and be able to do that separate from execution. Document it again, create a rolling innovation plan, have a plan of things that you're going to try and test over time. That can be a bigger, more inclusive plan or a rapid plan, but the idea is to at least structure your activities. Implement a process for prioritizing, conducting, and documenting. And at the end really is that once you've gone through all of this, the importance of the innovation center, the space is that you actually have things that are implementable, so operationalization is a key portion of that. So if you guys have a question, we're at the Q&A phase around that, so I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Yes, thanks, Matt. Thanks for that great discussion. I know that 20 minutes goes by so fast. We do have a few minutes left to answer some questions, and we do have a few that have come in. So as a reminder, if you have a question for Matt, be sure to enter that into the Q&A module at this time. Obviously, Matt covered a lot in the last 18 minutes or so, and there's a lot more that we could discuss. So we do encourage that you continue the conversation with Matt beyond today's session. His contact information is available in today's slide deck. Matt, if you go ahead and flip it to that next slide, everyone can see your contact info. There we go. Perfect. We'll also be sending everybody a link to a follow-up blog post where we'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways as well as the questions. And Matt is actually also in the process of developing an ebook, and that will be coming out here within the next week or two. So we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of that because he'll be diving a little bit deeper into some of the subjects from today. So without further ado, I'll jump into these questions. The first one is, how do you define success for innovation spaces?
Yeah, again, I think one of the key measures is not only the number of solutions that you implement. That's definitely one measure, but I think the other one is the amount of things you avoided to do. Again, so avoiding the shiny objects, I think it's a great measure. It's not just your wins that were implementable or operationalized, but also the things that you avoided, which actually can be quite a cost savings.
I'm sure. And can you provide an example of a shiny object that you've avoided in any of your projects in the past?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that we've seen would be, for example, the application of a gamification platform, for example, and we have seen really good implementations and applications of a gamification platforms that have been really successful in certain situations. And for one particular partner, we were exploring the investment and the cost around that. We actually ran an experiment with that. We actually gathered data that says that there is a return on investment. There actually is value that gamification can increase retention. For those that actually are pulling through and following through on that. But at the same time, compared to how they may spend their resources for other things, they made a change in the decision between investing in that platform to maybe go to a different direction. So it wasn't that gamification, again, was bad, but we avoided the application of that in an environment that didn't get them the business results that they were hoping. So before they went up a large scale and rolled it out, we actually had concrete data that said, your resources could be better spent maybe in some other areas for this upcoming year or the next couple of years.
This was a great example. We don't have any more questions that have come in at this point. If anyone does have a question, though, I'll leave this open for a minute or so after the session closes. That way we make sure that Matt can address any questions that you have. And so with that, we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. I want to say thank you again to today's speaker, Matt Donovan, and thanks to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for more webinars. We've got topics coming up such as seven secrets for user adoption success. And we have another topic coming up in July on how to keep people at the center of your digital transformation journey. I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your day.